Hi friends, today I'm going to show you how I make a sourdough sandwich loaf using Melissa K Norris's sourdough sandwich loaf recipe. Let's get started. It is the night before I plan to bake, so I need to get my sourdough starter ready. I just pulled this out of the fridge. It's very deflated. The bowl needs cleaned. It's flat. There are no bubbles. I need to add equal parts of flour and water in order to get this bubbly and ready to rise my bread in the morning. Some people measure, some people don't. I just dump it and it always works out fine. Because I've made this recipe so many times, I know that I need my starter to about fill the bowl in order to have enough for my 2 loaves of bread in the morning. So I'm going to start dumping some flour in, dumping some water in, mixing it up. I know it's ready when the consistency is like a thick pancake batter. I'll show you. Now you'll see I'll be using freshly milled flour for the actual loaf, but I do keep all-purpose flour on hand to feed my starter, mostly because my mill is really noisy and my kids are sleeping. So this is the consistency of my starter now. Like I said, like thick pancake batter. Some people measure, this is good for me. So I will let this sit on the counter overnight. It will get tall and bubbly. I like to cover it overnight, otherwise it will get a skin and we don't want that. I will take my spoon out and clean it and then put my silicone lid on top. I like to leave this hole available for venting because you need airflow for it to rise, but again, covering most of it so we don't get a skin on top. See you in the morning. Good morning. I have all my tools out here, ready to bake some bread, my recipe starter, some ingredients, my Bosch mixer, and my grain mill. Let's get started. Here's my sourdough starter. So I fed it really well. It clearly rose to the top and then deflated again. So technically it's best to use it when it's at its peak, bubbly. You'd be able to see lots of bubbles here in the side, but it got flat again because it got hungry. It didn't have enough food to rise all overnight. And that's fine. I use it just like this and it always works fine. So some people make a fuss about it, but my bread always turns out just fine. I just got my 800 grams of wheat. I'm using hard white wheat for this recipe. To use my mill, I take the lid off. There's a button around the back to turn it on. And here it turned on. And I dump this in the top. To the mixer bowl, which is water, sourdough starter, butter, sugar, salt, and now flour. This is my freshly milled flour. Fine, still warm from being ground and ready to use. If you have a regular stand mixer, it would probably be better to add the flour a little bit at a time, but because I have my big Bosch and because it has a lid, I am just going to start like this. I'm going to mix it until the dough just comes together and then let it sit so the flour can absorb all of that liquid. So it has come together. Certainly not kneaded or anything, but this is just enough to introduce the water to all of the flour and to get it soaking. Freshly milled flour especially needs more water and it needs more time to absorb it. This will help cut down on kneading time later. My dough has been sitting for almost 15 minutes. Looks about the same, but it will knead much more easily. I'm going to turn on my mixer and let it knead for a while. The recommendation from the recipe is 8 minutes. I don't ever time it. Let's just get going. Stop for a minute because I wanted to show you when we started, we had dough stuck to the side of the bowl here. At this point, all of the dough is off the outside of the bowl and it's in the dough ball. I know it's starting to get ready when it pulls away from the bowl. When all the dough wants to stick to itself more than it wants to stick to the mixer. I'm also stopping to check for the window pane test. My dough is starting to get stretchy, but it still rips when I try to look through it. So I know it needs a little bit more time in the mixer. My dough is done kneading. It is nice and soft, and I want to show you the window pane test so I know that the gluten is developed. Pull off a chunk, and then you want to stretch it so that you can see light coming through it, but it doesn't rip. Can you see the light coming in through the window? You can see my finger behind it. It means it's very stretchy. It can get really thin, then it breaks, which is understandable. Gluten is the culinary term for the stretchy substance that forms when water is introduced to wheat. And it is what makes it stretchy and able to rise and makes lovely, lovely breads. So now I'm going to shape my loaves and put them into my loaf pans.
Mama, why I don't know outside? Why I don't know outside? Mama, play outside?
You want to play outside?
Yeah.
Flatten it out. Then I fold this over a third. Fold this over a third. And then I tuck the ends in on top of that seam. Roll it over. I kind of pull this to roll over the top. Use the tension of the counter to pull it back toward me and make a log. Thanks, buddy. I have good little kitchen helpers, even when I don't need the tools. Okay, so it's a little bit stickier than normal, but that's it. And then I stick it in my very well greased loaf pan. These are my loaves in my very well greased loaf pans. I have a wet dish towel here I'm going to drape over top. You want it to be wet so it doesn't... Please wait for me. So it doesn't form a skin on the top of it while it's rising. Because it's sourdough, these will take most of the day to rise, and then we will bake them. I just took the towel off of my loaves and they're looking really good. I think the recipe says to let it rise till about the height of the loaf pan, which we are. You can see all the bubbles in the sides. That's how we know it's rising. Get the side. One of the fun parts about using glass loaf pans. Another trick to know of whether it is ready to put in the oven or whether it can rise more is if you poke the dough with your finger and the indent stays, that means it's not giving you very much more spring. That means it's about done rising. So you can still see my finger indent. Where is it? Right here. And so I know it's not going to rise much more. I will preheat my oven. Some people choose to brush the top with butter at this point to make a softer crust. I am always hesitant to do that because it might pop bubbles and I might lose some of my rise. So I will just put it in the oven like this. After 30 minutes in the oven, it's perfect. It's browned all around. It smells really good. Some people do brush it with butter now too. I will probably skip it this time, although it is delicious. One trick that I've learned too is instead of letting it cool upright, which can compress the bottom, I will let it sit on the side a little bit and then switch it to the other side. This is not necessary, but it helps keep my loaf a little bit fluffier. After it cools for maybe 10 minutes, then I will get it out of the loaf pan and then let it cool the whole way before you slice it, which is really difficult, but wait for it, it's better that way. Here's the finished loaf of bread. delicious. Here's what the inside looks like. Squishy, nice crumb, good solid loaf of bread for sandwiches. I'm gonna cut it. Nice and squishy. Smells awesome. It's delicious. Enjoy.